A millionaire paid her debt for a baby, but after taking her virginity, he gave her his heart. The roar of the hurricane had never frightened Arielle Knox. What broke her was the silence that followed. Standing in the crumbled lobby of Maison de Rêve, once the crown jewel of New Orleans' luxury hospitality scene, Arielle's hands trembled as she surveyed the wreckage. Broken chandeliers, shattered glass, and cracked marble lay where elegance once ruled. Hurricane Celeste had swept through the city like divine fury, but to Arielle the true destruction had begun long before the winds arrived. Water dripped steadily from the collapsed ceiling. Each drop echoed sharply in the space that once buzzed with laughter, clinking glasses, and velvet-voiced jazz singers. The voice of the insurance adjuster sliced through her days like a blade. "Miss Arielle, I'm afraid we have some difficult news." Arielle turned slowly. Her designer heels cracked softly on the ruined tiles. Even amidst devastation, she carried herself with the composure that had lifted her from scholarship student to the founder of a boutique hotel empire across the American South. "Let me guess," she said calmly, though her pulse thundered. "Your company's denying my claim." The man nodded, clutching his papers. "There's evidence of pre-existing structural damage, which voids your policy, and some financial irregularities. Nearly $3 million was withdrawn under questionable circumstances by Daniel Wynn. He's listed as your business partner." The words hit harder than any hurricane wind. Daniel, her friend, her co-founder, her trusted confidant. While she had been focused on innovation and growth, he had been draining their empire from within. Her future hadn't collapsed in a storm. It had been stolen. Arielle once believed that the worst thing in life was failure. But now, standing in the ashes of what took her a decade to build, she understood the truth. The worst thing is betrayal by the person you trusted most. Daniel didn't just steal money. He stole her reputation, her dreams, and the years she had traded for blood and tears. When headlines screamed, "Luxury hotel tycoon under financial fraud investigation," Arielle didn't defend herself, not because silence was strategic, but because she no longer had the strength to explain. Her trust had been violated, and that to her was a collapse far greater than any fallen building. She used to sleep 4 hours a night, poring over brick samples, obsessing over guest experiences. Daniel was always beside her, smiling, promising, "We're going to be legends." All the while, he was quietly writing the end of their story. Her dream didn't die in the storm. It died in deceit. And in the middle of the wreckage, Arielle felt a pain she couldn't name. It didn't scream. It didn't shatter. It just seeped into every breath, every heartbeat, like a sorrowful melody that would never fade. 8 months later, Arielle Knox no longer stood at investor conferences or graced the covers of business magazines. She was backstage now, holding a tray of red wine, her back straight out of habit she hadn't yet shaken. The fitted black uniform dress blended her into the shadows of the grand ballroom. Around her were people who once bowed their heads in greeting. Now they didn't recognize her face. Maybe they had forgotten. Maybe they only remembered the tabloids. Arielle didn't need to be remembered. She just needed a chance. That evening's gala was a tech investor fundraiser, luxurious, calculated, and full of the same pretenses she once knew too well. Crystal lights shimmered above tailored suits, hollow laughs, and handshakes worth millions. She was refilling a glass when a low voice caught her attention. She hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but 2 names stopped her cold. Julian Levant, will inheritance clause. She backed toward a stone pillar, careful to stay hidden, but close enough to listen. If Damon doesn't marry and have a child within 18 months, Julian inherits full control of Levant Holdings, a salt-haired man said. "The board is watching. It's a countdown now." Damon Levant. The name echoed. Founder of Levant Tech world prodigy, the man rewriting the world through code. Arielle glanced at the tall man in the navy suit, sharp-eyed yet weary. Damon Levant. He wasn't a man easily cornered. But his grandfather's will was the one thing he couldn't outmaneuver. It was written in blood, bound by law, and enforced by generations of unrelenting legacy. The final clause was a noose. If Damon didn't do it, his entire share of Levant Holdings would pass to Julian, the cousin he would never trust. He didn't need a wife to love. He needed an ally, sharp, resilient, and desperate enough to accept a marriage built on terms, not tenderness. Someone who could face the press, the board, the lies, yet still keep her chin high. And then he saw her. She was backing toward a column, pretending to polish a glass. But her eyes weren't pretending. They held the weight of someone who had once had everything and lost it all. Arielle Knox. Her name flashed across his memory like an old headline. The queen of Southern hospitality. The woman who once commanded entire feature spreads in business magazines. Now standing in shadow, she still carried the poise of someone who once ruled an empire. They looked at each other, unflinching, unfiltered, and Damon knew this was the woman he'd been looking for. He stepped forward, instinct leading the way. "Ms. Knox, we need to talk." She thought he might scold her, or worse, have her fired for eavesdropping. But he didn't. There was no accusation. Just a quiet directive. "My office, 7 a.m. sharp." Then he walked away, leaving her with a single lingering question. Why me? The next morning, Arielle arrived at Levant Holdings at exactly 7 a.m. The security guards had been notified. No questions asked. She was taken straight to the top floor. Damon's office wasn't like anything she'd seen before. Expansive, modern, but so minimalist it felt sterile. The gray light of dawn spilled through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting a cold gold hue over his face. Damon Levant looked up from his folder. No pleasantries. "You know what I need," he said. Arielle sat across from him, her gaze unflinching. "And you think I'm the kind of woman who sells herself?" He didn't smile. "I'm not buying a person. I'm looking for a partner." He slid a contract toward her. Over 10 pages, precise, clinical, legally airtight. The terms were clear. They would marry legally within 30 days. Arielle would have a child within 18 months. In return, $2 million immediately after the wedding, legal assistance to resolve her pending accusations, and $3 million upon the child's birth. Arielle let out a low, humorless laugh. "You need a womb and a washed-up name to legitimize your claim." "No," Damon said. "I need someone who won't crumble under scrutiny. You ran an empire. I need that, not your appearance." She stood, walked to the door, but her hand paused on the knob. Slowly, she turned back. "One condition," she said. "If I agree, I won't fake anything in public. No pretend romance. It's either real or it's nothing." Damon nodded. "I'm not hiring an actress. I need someone real." They stared at each other again, longer, heavier. Arielle didn't answer, but a part of her, the part not yet broken, whispered, "This might be the last chance she gets." She hesitated. That contract was a punch to her moral core. Cold, calculated, and utterly devoid of feeling. But then she remembered everything she had lost. Not just money, but dignity, trust, and a career once revered by an entire industry. She needed the money. But more than that, she needed someone powerful enough to pull her back from the edge. And Damon Levant was that chance. And then, the wedding was quiet, held at City Hall. No dress, no rings, no flowers. Just two people signing paperwork as if finalizing an investment deal. A living contract with clauses, timelines, and no room for love. Damon remained as stoic as ever. Arielle kept her face steady, but inside a storm brewed. Shame, hesitation, and a cold ache as she signed her name into an unreal life. She walked out into the midday sun, where reporters had already gathered. Within hours, headlines exploded. Billionaire Damon Levant secretly marries Arielle Knox, former businesswoman with a scandalous past. Marriage or strategy? She's back, now as Mrs. Levant. Arielle made no statement. She knew that any attempt to defend herself would only fuel the fire. Instead, she chose silence and braced for the next storm. The Levant estate felt like a fortress, grand, historic, and cold. The staff avoided her gaze. Every good morning sounded rehearsed, as if they'd been trained to say just enough, but nothing more. Within 3 days, she was summoned to a welcome party orchestrated by Damon's family. In reality, it was an evaluation, each guest silently weighing her worth. There she met Julian, the cousin circling the inheritance, and Celeste, Damon's former fiancée. Julian got straight to the point. How long do you think you can hold that spot? Arielle met his gaze, steady as she lifted her wine. I'm not here to hold a spot, Julian. I'm here to rebuild an empire. Celeste chuckled. You're sure he married you for anything more than a clause in a will? Without turning, Arielle answered, I'm sure I wasn't the one left at the altar. The room chilled, but Arielle didn't flinch. She stood tall among the powerful, as if the old instincts had awakened. She was no longer the victim. She was the one making her first move. After the wedding, Arielle and Damon lived under the same roof, but barely touched each other's lives, physically or emotionally. They were two individuals cohabiting under a legal agreement, polite, precise, and distant. They didn't share dinners, barely exchanged more than a few emails about schedules or signatures needed. Damon spent most days in his office on the second floor. Arielle made no effort to cross that boundary. She filled her time with reading, journaling, and reordering her thoughts, preparing herself for something even she couldn't quite name. Then came the first opportunity. One morning, passing his office, Arielle noticed a draft contract left open on the table. It was a preliminary agreement with an international software firm, part of an upcoming merger. It wasn't the figures that caught her attention. It was an unusual clause about intellectual property rights in North America. Her years handling licensing, international property laws, and expansion terms in the hospitality world told her this was dangerous. She said nothing. That night, she printed a copy, circled lines in red ink, and left margin notes. Simple, direct, and without explanation. The next morning, she placed the copy on Damon's desk. No name. That afternoon, he appeared at her door, holding the printout, with a look she hadn't seen before. You did this? He asked, voice low. She shrugged. It was just sitting out. I read it and couldn't ignore it. Damon stepped inside, studying the paper as if it had just saved an entire strategy. If we didn't fix this, we would have lost platform exclusivity in the US. Exactly, Arielle said. A pause settled between them, not tense but respectful. You studied law? Damon asked. No, but I've signed enough deals to know when someone's hiding a trick. Damon chuckled, genuinely, his first human smile. From then on, things quietly shifted. The first dinner was just soup and a few polite questions. By the third, Damon was telling her about boardroom betrayals and how his own family kept score in stock value. Arielle listened, not out of curiosity but quiet understanding. She told him about managing her first hotel, where she played owner, manager, and head chef because she couldn't afford help. He was stunned when she described scrubbing bathroom tiles with an old toothbrush before her first health inspection. That night, he did the dishes. Small gestures started appearing. He pulled out her chair. She poured his coffee. No requests, no performances. That night, after leaving his office, Arielle couldn't sleep. She went downstairs for water, loosely wearing one of Damon's white shirts, the one she'd borrowed during a rainy afternoon and never returned. It still hung in her room. The house was silent, swallowing every breath. But the soft sound of steady footsteps in the hallway made her pause. Damon! He stopped when he saw her standing by the window, her slender figure wrapped in the oversized shirt, hair slightly tousled, cradling a glass of water like she was warming her hands against the chill. Neither of them spoke at first. Damon moved slowly toward her, his eyes never leaving hers. And for the first time, Arielle didn't look away. I couldn't sleep, she whispered. Me neither. The space between them was barely a meter, but the real distance, the one between two guarded hearts, had already begun to disappear. The first touch was of hands, then eyes that didn't turn away, then breath close enough to blur into one. Arielle didn't ask. Damon didn't explain. When their lips met, it wasn't about contracts, convenience, or planning. It was real. The quiet ache neither of them dared name until now. That night, the boundary dissolved, and when dawn's light filtered softly through the window blinds, Arielle knew. Everything between them had truly changed. In the days following that rainy night, neither Arielle nor Damon spoke of what had happened, but the space between them no longer returned to what it was. Breakfast became warmer, conversation stretched longer. Arielle noticed Damon looking at her more often, not with calculation, but as if he was trying to listen to the words she wasn't saying. She changed too. She smiled more. Sometimes when pouring coffee, their hands brushed, and neither pulled away. They never defined what this was, but with every small gesture, it became clear. Between two people who once married for purpose, something real was quietly growing. Until one morning when Arielle felt a wave of dizziness and nausea that lingered for days. At first, she dismissed it. Stress, she thought. But a quiet instinct began to take root, undeniable. But when she stepped out of the bathroom holding the pregnancy test, the two red lines stared back like fate etched in ink. She stood still for a long moment, neither afraid nor overjoyed, just quiet, deep and strangely real. Her heart pounded, not in fear, but with something deeper. She took a breath, placed a hand over her belly. Inside her, a life was beginning, tiny but powerful enough to change everything. When Damon walked in, his eyes needed only a second to understand. He looked at her, then at the test in her hand, then back at her face, as if needing confirmation. She didn't have to say a word. A smile, small, quiet, but impossibly real, appeared on his usually unreadable face. "You're sure?" he asked softly, afraid to break the moment. Arielle nodded, and when Damon knelt beside her and gently placed his hand over her stomach, his eyes no longer belonged to the calculating heir. They belonged to a father. "Thank you," he whispered. That happiness lasted only 3 days. Julian didn't waste time. He leaked to the press that Arielle had been unfaithful, and the baby wasn't Damon's. The news exploded across every outlet. Scandal hits the Levant family. Is Damon's wife pregnant by another man? Media nightmare returns for Arielle Knox? Reporters swarmed the gates. Paparazzi hid in corners. Rumors spun and twisted like wildfire. Several shareholders demanded legal review to ensure the legitimacy of the heir. Trust within the company began to crack. Damon was furious, but controlled. He refused press interviews, doubled security, and brought Arielle into a private conference room to strategize. Arielle sat tall amid the storm, her eyes steady, tired but not afraid. "I'm not giving up," she said firmly. "This baby is our future." Damon looked at her, longer than usual. Then he nodded. No more words, just took her hand and held it tight. Outside, the world was in chaos, but inside that room, they were becoming a real family. The truth came in the form of an internal report, delivered directly to Arielle by a security team member. A thick file filled with encrypted emails, account logs, and tracked communications. The name on the file made her stomach drop. Gareth Wynn, CFO of Levant Holdings, Damon's college friend and right-hand man for nearly a decade. But the deeper she read, the clearer it became. Gareth had been covertly feeding information to Julian for over a year. Confidential deals leaked, strategy sabotaged, and most recently, he was the source of the rumor about Arielle's supposed affair. One line in the messages caught her completely off guard. Gareth confessed he had loved Damon for years, unrequited. And when Arielle entered Damon's life, something inside Gareth shattered. "I don't know what I hate more," Gareth wrote, "that she makes him smile, or that he no longer sees me." Arielle felt her chest tighten. She brought the file to Damon. When he saw Gareth's name on the first page, Damon froze. For several minutes, he said nothing. His knuckles went pale from gripping the folder. When he finally looked up, his eyes were broken. "He was the only person I never doubted," Damon whispered. "The only one I trusted, even when my family didn't." Arielle said nothing. She couldn't erase that kind of pain, but she could be there. She reached for his hand. "You're not alone," she said. "We'll fight together." A long pause. Then Damon squeezed her hand back. Not with cold strength, but as a man wounded and trying to stand again. Trust is fragile, and betrayal from someone closest cuts the deepest. But in that moment, Arielle understood more than ever. She wasn't just part of the plan. She was his anchor. She was home. Their joy over the pregnancy hadn't even settled when trouble came crashing in. For them, happiness always seemed to come with a cost. And this time, that cost came from where Damon least expected. The internal investigation began after Julian's false paternity rumor spread. Damon ordered a full audit, emails, accounts, every leak. He trusted no one now, except Arielle. That's when the name Gareth, the longtime CFO and Damon's right-hand man, started showing irregularities. Encrypted files buried in finance systems, unusual meetings with outside parties, hidden expenditures tucked into vague budgets. And then, the security team found undeniable proof. Gareth had met with Julian multiple times over the last 6 months. Damon was stunned. Gareth had been with him since the early days of the company. They'd pulled all-nighters together on the first project. Gareth knew everything, from internal strategy to Damon's private vulnerabilities. When Gareth was called into the boardroom to explain himself, he didn't deny it. "Yes," he said, "I met Julian." Damon stood silent, fists clenched. "Why?" he asked. "For money?" Gareth looked Damon dead in the eye. In that moment, Arielle, sitting across the table, felt a chill run through her. "Not for money," Gareth said. "For you." The room went still. "I've stood by you for years," Gareth said, voice heavy. "I thought if I stayed loyal, if I proved I was the only one who never betrayed you, one day you'd see me, not just as an employee." His voice trembled with pain, a pain rooted in silent longing, and a jealousy that burned hotter as Damon softened for Arielle. "I saw you change," Gareth continued. "You became gentler, human, and I knew it was because of her. A woman shamed by the world, suddenly holding the key to your heart." "So you betrayed me," Damon said, barely audible. "So I tried to shatter the illusion," Gareth replied. "If I couldn't have you, she shouldn't either." Arielle said nothing. She sat calmly, hand resting over her belly, eyes locked on Gareth as if to say, "You can't destroy what you never understood." Gareth was suspended immediately. Damon didn't speak the entire drive home. That night, he sat in the dark, in his office. No lights, just the silence of a broken heart. Arielle entered without knocking. She sat beside him, quietly, no questions. Minutes passed. Then he spoke. "I trusted Gareth like family. I didn't think someone could hide that much emotion, that much hate." Arielle gently took his hand. "The ones hurting the most," she said, "often end up hurting others." Damon turned toward her, eyes red. "I brought you into a world that isn't safe," he whispered, "and now you carry even my wounds." Arielle shook her head, then placed his hand over her belly. "No," she said, "I came to rebuild this world with you. Not alone. We'll fight. Together." Damon had never broken like this. After Gareth was removed, he became a drifting ship. He didn't rage, didn't shout. He just went silent. The sharpness in his eyes dulled, like every ounce of trust had been drained from him. That night, he sat alone in his office. No lights, no movement. Every plan, every file, every deal, pushed aside like they meant nothing. Arielle entered, gently placing a hand on his shoulder before sitting beside him. She didn't speak at first, just waited for him to breathe. Then she took his hand and placed it over her belly. "You once told me not to fear the dark, because it only makes the light more precious." Damon looked at her, eyes red and filled with grief. He lowered his head, and for the first time he wept. Not from weakness, but because he finally knew. He wasn't alone anymore, but it seemed fate wasn't done with them yet. Just as Damon's emotional wounds began to close, another blow struck, this time against the woman he loved. Arielle woke to the sterile glow of hospital lights. Her throat was dry, her lower abdomen throbbed with a deep, persistent ache. She knew immediately what had happened: a mild hemorrhage, a risk of miscarriage if she didn't rest completely. Damon sat beside her, gripping her hand like letting go might make her disappear. "The doctor said, you and the baby need absolute rest for the next 3 months," he said softly, voice rough from exhaustion. Arielle nodded. She didn't ask questions. She didn't need to. She knew Damon was more shaken than anyone. He didn't leave her side all night. The next morning, as she stirred awake, he whispered, "I'll walk away from the inheritance. We'll leave. You and the baby matter more than anything." Arielle turned to him, her gaze tender but firm. "No," she said. "We didn't come this far to run. I didn't fight this hard just to give up now, because of fear. I don't want to lose you." "You won't," she replied, "unless you lose yourself." Damon fell silent. Then he gripped her hand, tighter, steadier. "Then we'll do it your way." Arielle smiled despite the pain. "Not my way, our way." 3 days later, she was discharged under strict supervision. She worked from bed via video calls. Damon moved his entire executive office into their home. Together, they reviewed contracts, tracked every lead against Julian, examined every threat sent their way. For the first time, they weren't two people fighting separate battles. They were a team, and this time, they would not lose. Arielle recovered slowly, but her spirit had never been stronger. In the quiet of those days, something hardened inside her. They had found each other in the dark, but now it was time to face the world, unflinching, and bring every hidden truth into the light. After days of tireless preparation, the evidence was ready. The final battle awaited them in court, not just for an inheritance, but for honor, truth, and the future of their family. The courtroom was packed. Journalists lined both sides of the gallery. Cameras paused as Arielle and Damon entered, hand in hand. Across the aisle stood Celeste and Julian, ready to twist any truth to seize power. Defendant Arielle Knox manipulated Damon Levant's condition, forged medical documents, and attempted to defraud the Levant estate by producing a child of unknown paternity, their lawyer read aloud. Arielle didn't flinch. She stepped forward, not as a victim, but as someone who had survived. Her voice didn't shake. "We are not just prepared. We are armed with truth." The judge nodded. "Proceed." Arielle opened her folder. Her hand was steady. First, she presented bank transfer records, evidence of Julian funneling funds into offshore shell companies used to finance the smear campaign. Then came emails between Celeste and Gareth, discussing how to sabotage the internal accounting system and leak false data. "This is surveillance footage from Gareth's office," Arielle explained as the video played. "On this day, Celeste accessed and stole sensitive data." The screen showed Celeste inserting a USB drive, nervously glancing over her shoulder. The courtroom fell silent. "And finally, Arielle said, we present testimony from Daniel Wynn, Julian's former legal aide, now cooperating with investigators." Daniel took the witness stand. His voice trembled, but was clear. Julian ordered the documents to be altered to frame Arielle. He knew the baby was Damon's. They just wanted her out, to take control. The truth erupted across the room. Celeste went pale. Julian clenched his fist but said nothing. Their legal team stayed silent. The judge closed the file. His voice was firm. "Based on the evidence, this court declares Damon Levant the rightful heir to Levant Holdings. The child is biologically and legally his." A ripple of whispers ran through the room. A few applauded, but Damon only tightened his grip on Arielle's hand, and she nodded. "Julian Levant and Celeste Cross are hereby placed under arrest for defamation, corporate sabotage, and document forgery." The two were handcuffed on the spot. No more smug looks, no more power, only bitter defeat. Arielle watched them being led away, not with triumph, just relief, as though a weight had finally lifted from her chest. She turned to Damon, took his hand, this time no words needed. Every promise, every battle, every sacrifice had led them here. Justice had spoken, and they had won. 1 year after the courtroom battle, everything had changed in ways no one could have predicted, and more beautifully than anyone had hoped. Arielle stood in the lobby of her new hotel, the second door, a place not just for rest, but for people the world had once rejected. Single mothers, those who had stumbled, young chefs who'd lost their way. Each room was named after a spice, because she believed everyone's life just needed the right seasoning at the right time. Damon arrived holding one of the twins in his arms, while the other clung tightly to his leg. The babies had been born healthy at the end of spring. His eyes now held a kind of peace, quiet but deep enough to last a lifetime. After the trial, Damon restructured Levant Holdings entirely. For the first time, the company had support funds for single parents, mental health programs, and long-term community initiatives. He was no longer just a CEO, but a leader who listened and healed. That evening, in the small garden behind the hotel, Damon knelt down and offered Arielle a different ring. Not for duty, not for wealth, not for inheritance, but for love. This time, he said, voice softer than she'd ever heard, I'm not asking you for a contract. I'm asking you for forever. Not because I need to, but because I finally want to. Arielle didn't cry. She simply smiled and nodded. And this time, everything was real.